Okay, this section is on the upper quarter neurological screen. We've talked about this previously, but the upper quarter screen is what I tend to call it, the upper quarter screen. It's going to be 3 parts. It's a quick test that you need to know how to perform. You will also learn the lower quarter screen and lower extremity if you haven't already. This is not something that you're going to perform for every single assessment, but if at any point that the person indicates that they have any kind of numbness, tingling, paresthesia, decreased sensation, decreased motor function, any of those neurological indicators, you need to perform an upper or lower neurological screen. If it's in the upper extremity, you only have to perform the upper. If it's in the lower extremity, you really only have to perform the lower. But you do need to know both of these. So general terminology. The upper quarter screen is an assessment of neurological status of the peripheral nervous system of the upper extremities. We're going to look at sensation, motor function, and deep tendon reflex. So yes, the upper quarter neurological screen is testing sensation, motor function, and deep tendon reflex, but each of these, the sensation and motor function, have their own terms. So dermatome is a specific way for us, or a specific term that we're going to use when we test sensation. So instead of giving me the answer when I say, what does an upper quarter screen assess, I need you to, instead of saying sensation, you need to say, we actually assess a dermatome. A dermatome is an area of skin innervated by a single nerve root. Sensation is too broad. When I ask you what they assess, you say dermatome, because that's an area of skin innervated by a single nerve root. So different nerve roots, they've mapped all this out, and they've identified that different areas of the skin on your arm are going to lead back to a specific nerve root. So even though we have the entire brachial plexus, they have been able to figure out that yes, a certain, we'll say my lateral shoulder and upper arm are all innervated by C5. It's majority C5. So if I have decreased sensation at that dermatome, I'm able to tell what nerve root it's coming from. It's going to help kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. So, like I said, a dermatome is an area of skin innervated by a single nerve root. We can test dermatomes in multiple ways. The one that's most common that we do, especially like on the sidelines of football games and whatnot, are the light touch, where you just use your fingertips and you run it along their skin to try to see if there's any kind of difference in sensation. If you're in the clinic, you might try some other things like sharp versus dull. There are even in our athletic training lab, we have a reflex hammer that if you unscrew one end, a little brush comes out. If you unscrew the other end, a pin comes out. So you're able to hit them with a pin and see if they know that's sharp. Or if you hit them with the brush, how does that feel, sharp or dull? So you're able to, again, tell them, they can tell you basically how they're feeling it. Where if they're not feeling a sharp pinprick, then you're having trouble with that dermatome. Some people use hot and cold discrimination, and then some people use these things that are actually designed for 2-point discrimination. So if you look at these, they're just 2 little ends, and you might have done this in 7th grade science class or something. But tell me, your whole goal is, like, you see that this one's 1 by itself, then there's 2 close together, and they're a little bit further apart, and as you go around, they're a little bit further and further. And then this one, they start off far apart, and they keep going further and further. Your whole goal is to hit them with this side and say, let me know when you start to feel 2 separate pricks, 2 separate pin pricks. So you're just going to try it here, and they say, no, just 1. Nope, just 1. Nope, just 1. And we get out here, and they say, okay, now I feel 2. So we know that the 2-point discrimination on this one, I think that says 7. So is that 7? I think it's like 7 millimeters or something. That's the 2-point discrimination. So we're going to want to work to get back down to as small as possible. So it's just another way to give you more of an objective measure versus just saying the person has decreased sensation. We're able to actually write down and say we know what the 2-point discrimination actually is. Myotomes is the term that we're going to use for motor function. So the second part, so dermatomes is the first part for sensory. Myotomes is what we're going to use for muscle testing or muscle function. So a myotome is muscle testing to look at motor nerves that are innervating in the upper extremity. So there's going to be specific nerves that are going to innervate one muscle or one group of muscles. And it's going to be the same exact concept as the dermatome, where one nerve root goes to one area of skin. We're going to have, for myotomes, one motor nerve is going to go to one area or one group of muscles. And then reflex testing is just deep tendon reflexes. Deep tendon reflexes are going to be useful for looking at overall nerve integrity. It's not about so much the specific muscle that you're testing. You know, if you do like a patellar tendon or an Achilles tendon or bicep tendon, it's not really so much about that one specific muscle, but it's about the pathway. Is there any kind of problem with the nerves that travel up and then back down? Remember that reflex testing is using the muscle spindles for stretch reflex. So when you use patellar tendon, when you're sitting there with your knee flexed and then you hit it with the reflex hammer, you're causing a quick stretch. The muscle spindles send a signal that say that stretch is too powerful and too quick, goes up to the spinal cord, to the inner neuron, then comes back out and tells the quads to contract. So these deep tendon reflexes are really trying to assess, is there a problem in that pathway? How are your reflexes? Because that's going to mean more of a spinal cord problem or some sort of lesion somewhere up in the spinal cord. Not always so much that it's involved with the sensory or motor function. So when it comes to the specific upper extremity, now the upper quarter screen, when we look at dermatomes, there are these things, all these pictures that are called dermatome maps. Now, they're all going to vary a little bit. I specifically like this one, which is why I chose it. It might vary a little bit from the book or from a different text, but this is the one that I tend to go with because it's what I was taught. So here are your nerve roots, and then here's the specific area that tests them. So C4 is going to be your clavicle region, your superior shoulder, very top. So all you're going to do when you run through here is you got to test them bilaterally, because if you test them and say, does that feel different? They're like, different than what? So you have to touch both shoulders. So you're standing in front of the person, you're assessing both shoulders. So C4. C5 is your lateral deltoid lateral arm. C6 is your lateral forearm, your thumb and index finger. C7 is your middle finger, and I don't have the posterior side on here, but the posterior forearm. C8 is your medial hand, some medial forearm, and then T1 is kind of the inside of your elbow, inside of your middle upper arm. So you basically, if you do this, it's C4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's just you're going around the person, making sure that you touch them bilaterally, and you're asking them, is there any decrease or change or different type of sensation in any of those areas? So if you say, yeah, down here by my thumb, it feels really weird, then you know that C6 nerve root up in the neck is going to be involved. Then you have your myotomes. Again, this is one muscle or muscle group that are innervated by a specific nerve root. So in this case, C4, to test that, we're going to do break test on all these. So not the concentric, not the eccentric, just a break test. So you're going to ask them, shrug your shoulders, and then hold it up there, and you're going to push down. Shoulder abduction, put your arms to the side, do a break test at 90 degrees. For C6 and C7, C6 is elbow flexion, wrist extension. I always call this one the waiter, because if you actually perform elbow flexion with wrist extension, it's like you're holding a tray. C7 is going to be opposite, with elbow extension and wrist flexion. So if you actually perform elbow extension, wrist flexion, we call this one tip the waiter, because you're trying to slip them money from behind, giving them a nice subtle tip. There are 2 actions for 6 and 2 actions for 7. You want to test these individually, and we'll practice this in lab, but you don't put them into elbow flexion, wrist extension, and then pull. You test elbow flexion first, and then separately you test wrist extension. Then you test elbow extension separately, then you do wrist flexion. So you don't have to put them in some crazy position, but it's just a way for you to remember it. So I always remember C6 is the waiter, C7 is tip the waiter. You can remember whatever you want. Talk to different people. Different people have different ways to remember it, but that's the way I always remember it. C8 is finger flexion, so you have them curl their fingers and you resist that. And then T1 is finger abduction, adduction. So you have them spread their fingers, and you basically just pull two fingers together to see if they can give you some resistance. Now, obviously, your finger adductors are not very strong, so of course you're going to be able to move their fingers, but are they giving you some resistance? And then when you do adduction, you have them put their fingers together, and you just pull their fingers apart. Not very strong movements, but again, are they giving you some resistance? And then for your deep tendon reflexes, we have 3 in the upper extremity. C5 is your bicep brachii. Again, we'll practice these in lab next week. But you must put your finger, have the person relaxed, you hold them in some flexion, you palpate the biceps tendon at the elbow, and then you put your thumb over the bicep tendon and you actually hit your thumb with the reflex hammer. You're not going to get some big jerky movement like you're going to get in the lower extremity. Like when you do patellar tendon, I mean, it's an obvious reflex. In the upper extremities, are way more subtle. But with your thumb over the tendon, when you hit your thumb, you can actually feel the bicep tendon twitch. So it's not some big crazy flexion, but you will see some supination occur if you do it correctly. C6 is going to be your brachioradialis. I know we haven't had elbow yet, so your brachioradialis is going to it does not cross the wrist joint. It's going to start just before the wrist joint at the radial styloid process. Get my pen here. Where am I at? The radial styloid process, and it goes all the way up to the lateral side of the humerus. So it's going to start down here, radial styloid process on the radius. It does not cross the wrist joint. It will not do anything in the wrist. Runs all the way up this side of your arm, and it's going to originate right up here, so on the lateral side of your humerus. So it's running straight across here. In order for you to find it, you can actually do resisted elbow flexion, and it will pop up. So with your in a thumbs up position, if you do resisted elbow flexion, you'll see it pop up. You just want to follow that, have the person relax, and actually hit them with the flat side of the reflex hammer. Not hard, because you're basically hitting it on bone, but you should be able to see a twitch through there. And then C7 is your tricep tendon. You want them to be seated and relaxed. Then you take their elbow, turn them in an internal rotation, let their arm just hang there. You palpate the tricep tendon at the olecranon, which is actually very easy to get. And then you can either hit your thumb, but I actually tend to hit the tendon itself because it is so raw, but I tend to use the flat side as well. So that is the upper quarter screen. Most important things, obviously, learn how to do your dermatomes, myotomes, and deep tendon reflex. But upper quarter screens and lower quarter screens assess dermatomes, myotomes, and deep tendon reflexes.